130 Wellington Drive, Knoxville, Tennessee. Interview conducted by Dr. Charles Johnson, Department of History, University of Tennessee, at Mr. Brown's home. Interview February 4th, 1988. Yeah, that one works for you. What I do usually is just let it run and talk without having any particular course planned for the conversation.
Well, is it that sensitive?
Yeah, there's no problem at all. It's got a good mic on it.
Mm-hmm.
What I usually try to do is to get some idea of what the person's life was like before they went into the military, and then talk some about their military experience, and then sort of what it was like after the war was over, and what impact the military had made on them. But it's a very free-flowing kind of conversation usually. I was reading in one of the newspaper articles, you're from Western North Carolina, Asheville, originally?
Yes.
And you said the last time I was here, you came to Knoxville to go to school?
I came on a partial basketball scholarship to the university from Asheville, and after that got into a little business, clothing business, men's clothing business.
Did you graduate from UT?
In 31.
In 31.
1931, along with Bobby Dodd and Hackman and that group.
Oh.
Yeah. And I met a Knoxville girl. Ruth Blank. We got married and kept our business, and grew into the department store business into George's, which was an old department store here, which later became Rich's.
Oh, okay. I'm not a native, and I didn't know.
Yeah. And I was elected to the board of directors at Rich's, and stayed there 2 years, and then came out and went into business for myself, which was known as Fred Brown's. And then we later merged with another old store here, the Hall store. So it became the Hall Brown's men's store.
Men's clothing.
And we stayed there until we sold that to the gigantic Genesco firm, Genesco coming out of Nashville.
That was back in the 70s, late 60s? No, 70s.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. 15 years, about 15, 16 years ago. Well, I was in the original Fred Brown store, having gotten a second degree, a second lieutenant's commission in the school. Then we started mobilizing, and I was ordered to active duty.
Oh, so you were in ROTC when you were at UT?
Yes.
Was that required when you were there, or was that voluntary?
No, it was pretty loose. It was required, but you could get out of it if you could come up with some good excuses, as I remember. Mm-hmm. And I had 2 years out of it.
But you had a second lieutenant's commission?
I got well, actually, I didn't get that until I came out of school and got back into it on the correspondence course, because I'd had this basis, and I got my second lieutenancy that way.
I see. But that was after you left UT?
Yeah. So then, when I was ordered into active service for a period of a year, I was sent over to South Carolina, Fort Jackson, and then transferred to a Corps headquarters, where I stayed the rest of my Army experience in that Corps headquarters.
Now, when you were called the service, was that before we were involved in the war? Was that before Pearl Harbor?
Yes. As I said, it was a mobilization period. There was war talk all the time, but we weren't involved. As a matter of fact, I'd used up almost 11 months of my year when war was declared, when Pearl Harbor occurred. It was real interesting. I was out with my wife and this small boy walking, and dropped by my colonel's, full colonel's house. He and I had become real good friends. He was my boss in the headquarters, my immediate boss. And he met me at the door, and he said, they just bombed Pearl Harbor, and we're in a hell of a shape. It surprised me so. I said, Colonel, you got to be lying. Normally I wouldn't say to a colonel you're lying. And he didn't even notice what I'd said because he was so perturbed himself. And so about that time the radio started blaring and said all officers and men report to their headquarters now.
It must have been a real shock for your wife too.
I went on up to, our headquarters was in a dormitory at the University of South Carolina. And I reported in, and I was writing a friend of mine in Washington this incident. I exaggerated a little bit, but I said they sent me out with a sergeant to guard a trestle that hadn't been used in 20 years. I said I had a rusty gun and 2 bullets. I showed the sergeant how to load it. And that was the basis of our experience up to that time. But things changed rapidly. I'll tell you, we really got mobilized. And of course, my business of coming home in another month was extended for almost 5 years. And we were the first big headquarters to be ordered overseas. There had been maybe a division. Certainly we had sent only a regiment from our areas. We had our corps commanded Fort Jackson, Fort Bragg, and a couple of other smaller units. We had at that time under us about 150,000 troops.
This was 4th Corps?
I beg your pardon?
What Corps headquarters was it?
1st Corps.
1st Corps.
Yes. Mm-hmm. That was of course, it was it was just a relative headquarters up till the expansion. And they had formerly been situated in the Senate building in Columbia. But when the mobilization really started, then they had to move, and the general, that's the first time I'd ever been in a general's presence, he called me in and said, you seem to be familiar with the city. I want you to go out and find us some headquarters. And to a very green lieutenant, that was a pretty deadgun big assignment. Anyway, I had gone by this dormitory, and I saw that it was primarily not in use. It was just one little end of it. And I approached the authorities at the University of South Carolina, and they were delighted to rent it to us. So we took a very large dormitory for the Corps headquarters, and remained there until we were ordered overseas, which was about almost a year later. In the meantime, of course, directing the Corps directing all of these activities at Fort Bragg and Fort Jackson, the divisions that were being poured in, and the auxiliary troops. It got to be a big town. We had the biggest maneuvers that the nation had ever had.
That's what they call the Carolina maneuvers?
Yes. Patton was there. General McNair from, of course, from Washington. He was killed.
Yeah.
Not too much later than that. He was observation post out in the European theater. But it was exciting time. We had the equipment was so pitiful. Maneuvers as an example, we used stovepipes to represent mortars, and everything was almost a paper show because there wasn't any equipment to do this with. Had umpires that with a white band on their uniform, and they'd say whether you had won a tactical exercise or lost it, you know, depending on the placement of your troops and the handling of them and the artillery, etc.
Was it a kind of desperate feeling to try to make bricks without straw that way, not to have any equipment or any decent amount of equipment?
Well, I presume that was true on the top side, where the people supposedly knew what was happening or what was going to happen. Down in our low ranks, we just took it as a matter of course. It was just we didn't know enough. Our inexperience was so great that we didn't know the facts actually. We almost at the conclusion of these Carolina maneuvers, we got orders to send a regiment, a full regiment, to Hawaii, and we had to rob other units. And believe you me, if you could hear a colonel holler of another unit when you're taking his trucks and some of his guns, what few he has to augment the equipment of this regiment that's going out. It was pretty gruesome, but that's what happened. The orders went out to you'll furnish so and so and so and so, you know, and there was nothing else to do but do that. So the regiment, by virtue of all of the help that they got from the others, it went out pretty well equipped. A TO, a table of operation equipment, you know. They were almost to Honolulu when it was bombed. They were lucky; they were still on the ships, so they helped those ships, of course, out at sea until the situation had gotten clarified a little bit at Pearl Harbor, and then, of course, the troops came in, and they staged there for a considerable time with additional training and so forth. And then they were sent to Australia to further go into the jungle.
What was your job in Columbia?
You mean my particular job?
Right.
Yeah, we were a kind of catch-all. I was assigned first to the office of the quartermaster, which is a confusing thing because there are two types of quartermaster. One is a quartermaster on a base that handles food and clothing and equipment other than ordnance equipment. Then there is the so-called tactical quartermaster who does the planning of these units, and that's what a corps is. They didn't handle that. They weren't connected per se with food and clothing and things like that. They were connected with commanding troops and training troops and things like that. So we had a variety. As an example, when they sent me out to find the headquarters, you see, or when they sent me out to secure transportation for the president and Lord Mountbatten and Churchill and those
Yeah, I
people.
saw that picture in there, that the same one that you've got up there, that inspection with Churchill and the others, that was before the war started?
Yes.
Or, yeah, it was
Yes.
before the war.
Yeah. Of course, before our war started.
Yeah.
But obviously Churchill was here to get all the help that he could get and to see, and so was Lord Mountbatten, to see what the status of the training was. And they had I forget the other general that came with them, forget his name. But, he was in the heart of the thing, and as far as Great Britain was concerned.
That was the time you told me about the last time when you had to go out and get some automobiles?
Had to get a couple of limousines for
Couple
these
limousines.
people and keep it quiet because we were enjoined to be very secret about all these powers coming in there, including the president, of course, and they would be brought in by train into the fort, and there they'd be completely protected, but outside there wouldn't be any way. My job was to get adequate vehicles for it, and I stumbled into a way by going by a mortuary and seeing two fine Cadillacs sitting there, and I approached the owner and said, I'd like to rent these for a couple of days, and we furnish the drivers and so forth. And he explained, he said, well, you know, my business is to conduct funerals, and if I have a funeral, I have to have my vehicle. But he says, as far as we don't have a schedule now, and you can have them with that proviso. And then he looked me right in the eye and he said, this second vehicle here is a little bit nicer than the other, and that would be, I think you ought to put the president in that. And I almost dropped my teeth. I wondered how in the world that man could know when we were holding this big secret. And here's the man uptown in the mortuary business that knows all about it.
You wonder how that happens, you know, because somebody always seems to know.
Yeah, that's right.
Or a lot of people seem to know sometimes. The inspection and everything with Churchill and Roosevelt and the rest, were you involved at all in that, other than getting the limousines?
Well, I was a part of personally, I was a part of the tour because I was conducting the vehicles. No, all I'd do is open the door for Churchill and salute him and get out of the way. Kind of like a monkey on a string, I guess. But thank goodness that didn't last but a day, and then they were gone.
Tends to churn things up when people like that come around.
Yeah, it certainly does. They paraded a full division. Actually, it was augmented, but a full division of 14,500 people with all of the vehicles. It took hours to pass a span. I don't think that they stayed there all that time, but it's one of the old time officers told me that was the biggest parade they'd ever had in the States of any kind. I don't know if that was true.
Now, when you got orders that ended up putting you in the Pacific, did you go directly from the States to Hawaii and then down to Australia?
We went directly to Australia. We made a stop at New Zealand, but that's the only time we ever saw land from the time we left San Francisco till we got to Sydney. We pulled in for a day and a night at Auckland to pick up some supplies and pick up some wood that some of the naval personnel that picked up at sea. We had lost one of the carriers there, and these people come up, and we went into Sydney.
Did you have a chance to tell your wife where you were going?
Oh, no.
No. Or even that you were leaving? You were
Well, she knew I was going to Australia, but she didn't know where in Australia or anything like that.
Had she been living in Carolina with you, or had she been living in Knoxville?
No, she lived when I was ordered over there for the year. She went with me, and my young son,
That's
4
nice.
years old, 3 years old.
So you got a chance to see him grow for a year anyway. While
That's
you were
right.
there.
And when I came back, 2.25 years later, my train came through Knoxville. I had to go down to Atlanta, and we picked up my son here, and it was a shock to me because the 2.5 years. I remember saying to him, "Son, how have you been?" And you know, I was ill at ease. He said, "Well, I'm all right, but sir, these 6-year molars are giving me a little trouble," and that was an awful shock.
You've missed a lot.
Yeah, 6-year molars are giving me trouble.
When you got to Australia, you went to Sydney.
We landed in Sydney.
Landed in
yes.
Sydney, and then where did you go, or what
Then-
did you do there?
Well, when we landed in Sydney, this huge ship that I was telling you about that foundered in the midst of that heavy storm. The tugs couldn't hold it, and we had great difficulty in getting the troops off, discharging the cargo and so forth. We were moved out to a brand new camp outside of Sydney, and the water was about 2 inches deep in this whole plain. You couldn't even put your shoes in the water. You had to keep them on the. We had cots, so you could stay on the cots to stay out of the water. But other than that, we were in a flat flood, and we stayed there about 3 days, and then boarded those little Australian trains to go north. And the Australian trains, at least in the upper provinces, were about like our western trains that you see in the old cowboy movies. They even had different gauges. When we'd come to one province to move into the other, had to discharge the train and put it on another one because the tracks were different. See, it took us quite a while to move up to a place called Rockhampton, a nice little town up in northeastern Australia. All of Australia, practically all of Australia, is on the coastlines. If you get into the interior, it's mostly desert. And so then that became our official headquarters for training, and later that's where a division was moved in under the Corps direction for training to get it ready, and from there, then we'd move out in small sections out of Rockhampton to go into New Guinea. That's where Ackerberger was ordered. As a matter of fact, we got into Rockhampton on a Sunday morning, as I remember. Anyway, it was an early morning, and that afternoon, before I was even unpacked, we had a little hotel for officers, and I was summoned over to the general's headquarters and said, as usual, he said, Brownie, have you written your will? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, you're going with me in the morning. MacArthur's sending a plane in, and we're going up to New Guinea to take over that operation. And you're going with me? And I said, yes, sir. Of course, I said, yes, sir.
Yes, sir. You don't say anything else. When did you first meet Eichelberger? When?
In Columbia.
In Columbia.
Yeah.
Was he in command of the Corps headquarters there? Or?
Well, not when I first joined it, but the general commanding our corps was relieved of his assignment, and Eichelberger replaced him. General McNair, whom I told you had been killed, came down to observe the Carolina maneuvers, and he didn't like a lot of things. He didn't like a whole lot of things he saw. So, among other things, our commander was relieved, and Eichelberger was sent in. And he stayed with the Corps until he became the commander of the 8th Army, which was 2-3 years later.
But you had gotten to know him and worked with him pretty closely while you were in the States.
Well,
relatively
fairly well. I mean, as from a very junior's officer's standpoint, you know. But after we got overseas, then we became. I worked with him much closer.
And you continued as basically quartermaster duties with him?
I went into the Chief 4 area. That's an expansion. That embraces all of the supply areas, including ordnance, medicine, quartermaster, so forth.
So when you were, that would have been December of '42 when you and Eichelberger and the group went into New Guinea. November, December '42.
Yes, it was the latter part of November. We stayed. I don't remember now if the general came back before Christmas. When the thing was consolidated, he left me up there as a liaison with the 41st Division. I stayed another 10 days after my little head. He only took 6 officers up there when we went the first time, and 6 or 8.
Interesting coincidence. You're both from Asheville. I read.
Is what?
Interesting coincidence. You and he were both from Asheville, North Carolina, originally, weren't you?
Actually, he wasn't. His wife was a Carolinian,
oh.
And he came from Ohio. But after the war,
he settled in Asheville.
He settled in Asheville.
I see.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Of course, he is acquainted with because of Miss M.
Right, Miss M.
He had a lovely house in Biltmore Forest adjoining the golf course. And, I visited with him there, so enjoyed it. But Eichelberger was quite a character. He dominated a group, personality and size, and smart. Spoke 2 or 3 languages very eloquently. I understood. He had been commandant of West Point. He had been attaché to Russia, and associated with MacArthur prior to that. So he was certainly was a veteran.
Mm-hmm. And he was going into a very difficult situation in New Guinea.
Extremely difficult. He was told to. It's a well-known story. He was told to go into this situation, consolidate it, and don't come back.
Yeah, you were there, weren't you, or when he was told that?
I was standing right by him when MacArthur told him that. I think it was repetitive. I think that he had already told him. I think MacArthur was telling him that for the benefit of the few of us that's standing on the porch, because we weren't invited into the inner sanctum when they only General Barter, General Kenny, 5th Air Force, had accompanied General Eichelberger into MacArthur's little house up there in Port Moresby in New Guinea.
Was that your first experience with MacArthur, or had you seen him before?
I had not.
Had not.
Yes. I saw him several times after that. After this, after General Eichelberger had completed his deal up there and won that part of the war, then he went, of course, back to our headquarters at Rockhampton, and I came back. Incidentally, we about starved to death up there. We had nothing. We at Boona, which was the thing that was to be accomplished over there, to capture Boona, and kill the Jap. Every morning, the first thing any of us would do is look at the mountains to see if the clouds had lifted, because if the clouds lifted, we might get a few airplanes in with some supplies. If the clouds were in there, they couldn't come because these old planes couldn't come over the mountains. They were too high. They had to come through the gap. So it was very important if we had some sunshine, if we had, and then a lot of times they couldn't make it. They couldn't come through. Sometimes it would rain so hard that you couldn't land, and it pushed the stuff out to where there was. And you had no parachutes.
Just come in low and push it out.
Yeah. And when you're going low, you're still flying, 100 miles or a little better an hour, and you can imagine what happens to that stuff when it hits the ground. Yeah.
Yeah, being in charge of supply must have been a difficult.
It was unbelievable. There was no transportation, and there wasn't a whole lot of supplies, even where the transportation took off. The supplies, the dominant thing was, of course, Europe. And MacArthur raised holy hell about that all the time, and as he should, he's trying to take care of his area. It was right. The War Department was handling it right. They had to complete the deal in Europe.
Yeah, the decision that the Germans were the most dangerous ones,
Yes.
and so. Yeah, that's what I tell my class. It was a good decision.
Yeah, it had to.
Do you remember your first impression of the jungle? The first time you landed in New Guinea, or what impression you had when you got there?
God awful. When MacArthur told my general, said, Bob, go over the mountains in the morning, consolidate those positions, or don't come back. And the general said, yes, sir, and we turned and went down to the Jeep, and it was real quiet, because that was a pretty tough order that we just heard. And General Eichelberger turned to General Swift, to General Kenny, and said, George, you're going to give me air cover in the morning, protection. And he said, no, I figured I'll be next ranking to MacArthur tomorrow. Of course, kidding him along. And when we left the following morning, daylight, there were 4 fighters around our little old plane. And, we got into Boona, a place called Obadura, the landing right by Boone. And we landed, and the pilot said, "Get the hell out of here because the red alert's on. I got to go." And of course, he never cut his motors off. He just he piled out of the plane and he took off. And we got strafed. The field did in about I guess another 10 minutes. So I got indoctrinated to the warfare real fast, all the rest of it. I found there that there was no reason to teach troops to dig foxholes. All you needed was the impetus, because I found myself scratching a pretty good hole with my helmet there in it. Soft soil. You can dig a hole if you're scared enough.
Was it pretty swampy, low ground, or?
Of course, there was some areas of dry ground, quite a bit where the village was, Boone Village, and its area, surrounding area, and where our airfields, the two little airfields were. It was dry ground, except when the torrential rains came. And the rains were unbelievable. We had, as I recall, in the space of 24 hours one time, we had 11 inches of rain. That is not a rain, that's a waterfall. You can hardly stand up in it when it comes that hard. But the jungles themselves were unbelievable. The mangrove roots, I've seen soldiers have to sleep on the roots and tie themselves onto them to rest at all, keep them falling off and drowning, particularly the sick and the wounded. And I never saw crocodiles or alligators. I saw them in Australia, but I never saw them in the jungle. I never did see a crocodile or alligator in the jungle. I saw snakes, lots of snakes, wild pigs. The jungles are bad. The jungles will kill the uninitiated, not as quick as a bullet, but it can get the malaria, the dengue, the bedwater. We had very little protection against malaria at first. We finally got a supply of Ativan pills, and that helped. But the temperatures in troops would run up. I brought a little corporal in from out of the way. He was practically unconscious, and I carried him in, and when he took his temperature, it was 106. And the doctor said, "This is the highest temperature I've ever seen." And we were hungry all the time. When I went into when I first went in the jungle, I weighed 190 pounds. I was pretty well trained. I was in real good shape. Real good shape. And let's see, about around 2 years later, when they sent me down to Sydney for a leave, I weighed 155 pounds. Now, had I been obese at 190, and lose that, that's not that big. But to go from 190 to 155 it's like food. And sweat and fever and all of the things that went in. Now, I hadn't been sick. I'd had dengue once, but I never did have malaria, and I can't tell you why. You take your britches down to go to the bathroom, and you could have 30 or 40 mosquitoes on you. We slept under nets. We all had, the officers at least, in our little headquarters, we had nets to sleep under. Put your hands and face, and just cover that.
You didn't have any insect repellent?
Oh, no. said, it was sometime, we had, at first we was purifying our water, our drinking water with iodine. If you try that sometime, if you want something that's really palatable, drop a little iodine in a glass of water just to see how we lived. You put a big Lister bag, that's a water bottle in the and put a little iodine in that, and that's what you had.
For you to have lost that much weight over 2 years, that meant that the food and the supplies and the rest of it really didn't improve.
Oh yes, it did. It improved.
But not enough to get
it
you
wasn't
back.
2 years. It was a little over a year when I went, because
I
see, then I went down to Sydney, and incidentally I'd gone down there on a fruit boat, and they had real good food, and so I'd caught up some.
Picked up some.
Yeah, that's the first time I had seen real good food in a long time. The first phases of our war, there was unbelievable lack of supplies and everything. I mean, and that wasn't food, medicine, airplane parts, ammunition, you name it, and it was in short supply. Secondly, even when the ships could get in, how do you get it to the front? Until we owned some airfields and some ports further up the New Guinea coast, alleviate that. Now, our first big operation, Boona, was a very small operation as measured by things to come, Iwo Jima or Hollandia or the Philippines. But our first big operation, which was at Hollandia, we had adequate supplies. We had delivered ships. We had the Navy in full support, and the Air Force. We were a long way from the base. But even there, with all those supplies, we had a very unfortunate thing. Our beaches got bombed out the first night, and the unloading had gone beautifully, miraculously fast, because it was the type of shore that the landing craft could come up and almost drop the ramps on the dry ground. So the stuff came out in a hurry. But two little old Jap bombers came over and dropped 3 or 4 bombs. I think 2 of them went in the ocean, and the other 2, or one of them at least, went right into the middle of a 100-octane gasoline dump. And of course, the fire started raging, and then it exploded a whole lot of ammunition. So we had a beach that was untenable.
It's a disaster.
The whole beach. Everything the ships had to be pulled away from shore, way back into the bay. The troops that could get on ships did, and the others went into the jungle and got away from the fires. But we had the supplies that were there couldn't be touched. So they had to start flying supplies in and dropping them. Same old Boona deal, except we had a few hand troops at Boona. Now we've got thousands, and so it takes that much more supplies. And the first priority was medicine and ammunition, because the Jap was in there and he had to be moved. And then got some food in it. Of course, when the fires got out, we had to bring the ships back in, but it took several days. We were in bad shape. The airfields were about several miles from the coast back in, so had to have roadways. The Jap had a little roadway. The Jap moved their equipment. They had plenty of time to move it, had to have adequate vehicles, but they could move them at their pace and in dry weather, because nobody was pushing them, you know, back then. And here we are. We got to go. And ostensibly, this was a dry season, but the rains came like that, and we got bogged down, and we had to get bulldozers up, widen roads, push the junk out of the way.
Back at Buna, I remember reading that the Japanese ended up being just as cut off from supplies, really, as the Americans were, pretty much.
Even more so. The Japs was they were real fine, tough soldiers. Certainly at that stage of the game, they could live on practically nothing. But there, when the Battle of the Coral Sea, the Navy stopped the Japs from coming in, and that cut off their supplies, and so they were on the starvation diet. Although they got in, you know, would come in and cover at night. So if they hadn't been cut off and could reinforce that, I think we'd still be fine. Then you had to take that and stuff.
And apparently a fair number of them are veterans from earlier campaigns.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of them had come in from China, you know, and then they were their attitude about life, and was so much different from ours, I guess. I don't know if they were afraid like we were. I read some of their diaries, captured diaries, where the individuals were certainly suffering. Did I show you one of them?
No.
I'll read you that place.
I saw one that was translated, captured from, taken off of a dead officer on Guadalcanal that described some of the time things. But that's the only one from that
This
area.
one was an enlisted man. He was well educated.
And of course, at that point, they were defending, and the Americans were attacking, which always, or usually at least, the defenders got some advantage, and the attackers got to expose themselves, and the defender can stay in a hole and shoot at it.
Of course, and again, you've got some protection that the attacking man doesn't have.
The sense that I've gotten from doing some reading is that Eichelberger himself was very important in galvanizing and mobilizing this force, that he's given a lot of credit for what happens after he gets there.
Well, I hope he was given his due credit, because he was in his first operations, like going back to the Buna thing, he was in the front lines. He told me one time, said, "Brownie, I don't know how good a general I am, but I'm a hell of a good platoon leader." and MacArthur criticized him for being exposed like that, and yet he had told him, by the same token, go in there and get it done and relieve whoever needs to be relieved, and get this mission accomplished. So, what do you do? And Eichelberger was at it. I told you, I think, when of a morning he'd say, "Who wants to go kill some Japs? I want some volunteers. You and you and you. Let's go. You can't live forever." And he meant it. And off we'd go. Whoever he pointed to that morning. I only went with him once. That was enough.
You remember that one fairly well?
I remember it well.
There were a fair number of officers around him who were badly wounded at one time or another.
Well, his aide was wounded, and his ordnance officer was wounded, and his chief of staff had his thumb shot off, and they were all around him.
There's somebody named Edwards, I think.
Edwards was his senior aide. I think he's an attorney over at Durham, North Carolina, and a very fine person. He was grievously wounded. We didn't think he could live to get back to the rear line. Pulled him through. Got a big hole in his belly.
Doesn't do it.
Come in the house, Miss Brown. That's the way it satisfies, particularly in the fighting areas. We lined up in the chow line. I've seen Eichelberger in the chow line with his mess kit. Not often, but at least he's shown off there. And it gave him a ride.
Yeah, that's in that book you lent me, that dissertation that was done up at Temple on Eichelberger, the one I'm reading now. That's one of the things this guy talks about, is the impression that Eichelberger gave that he really did do the things that he expected people to do, and was out in the field with the troops. Didn't back away on anything.
He knows the story. I told him the story about that.
Did you tell him about my meeting? It was in the trunk.
Wasn't in the trunk. That was a medical trunk. But I'd forgotten about that. We went in there so fast that these officers had run into the jungle, you know, and what few enlisted men gone with them, all except this joker, who wished later he should have gone. But they had some geisha girls in there, and there was some beautiful knitting. She just completed part of it. So I sent that to Ruth. What did you ever do with it?
I had to burn it. But it was, the needles were rusted, all rusted, the inside the knitting. It was a blanket I had. I don't know what it was, about this big. And she knitted about that much of it. And it was knitted on, you know, like you'd knit a pair of stockings, about 4 or 5 needles across. 4 or 5 needles across that she just picked up and knitted on with it. And the needles were rusted. That had to get fumigated or disinfected or something. I don't know what.
Probably both.
Ed Howland had a lot of funny things. We had, I think it was 4 civilians that had to do with railroads. And they had come in right in among the first echelons. Why railroaders would be in there, I don't remember. These were Australians and Dutch.
This is the Hollandia?
Yeah, these are civilians. Great big old guy. Well, the second night when we got inland and captured this headquarters that we're talking about now, we had a green company that's guarding the headquarters, and they got shook up tonight. I don't know if some of the Japs were coming back into their headquarters or not, but everybody was shooting at everything else. Everything that moved, somebody was shooting at. And they had left some canvas up. There's several pieces of canvas up, and these 4 civilians had gotten them a little tent there, and it was raining like thunder. One of them went out or something, and all this hell broke loose. You know, everybody's shooting, and everything was real tense. And this guy came back. And these guys thought they were being attacked. And they had the damnedest fight. Those four guys were about to kill each other. Nobody could see anything, and you couldn't, you didn't know what was happening. Everybody was as tense as they could be. My colonel was laying this way, and I was laying this way, and we had our guns drawn because anything came at our end, we were going to shoot them, see? And you didn't know who they were. And these guys almost killed each other. Boy, finally, somebody hollered out or something, and they recognized what was happening and stopped. But they were scarred out plenty the next morning.
Thought they were fighting for their lives.
Yeah. That's when I told you about the aide when you're talking about Edwards. Well, now the junior aide was a guy named Shook. And when this Eichelberg was right in the middle of that, and they had guards around him like this. And the firing would die down, and old Shook said, "General, General." He didn't answer, you know. And the firing broke loose again, and it went on for a while. And a couple of grenades exploding pretty close. It died down, and here comes the call again. "General, General, General Eichelberg." For God's sweet sake, Shook, if you've got to call me at a time like this, call me Bob.
Call me Bob.
And that became a byword in our headquarters. Just call me
Bob.
Yeah, I've had more than one person tell me that the dark at night in the rain in the jungle is about as scary as it gets.
It's gruesome. Everything's unknown. It's so foreign to anything you've known. If there wasn't any war going on, if there wasn't any enemy, you'd still be. I'd be scared.
I'd afraid something, anything come up.
The noise, it's unbelievable.
From what? Crickets and what?
All birds and animals and everything else is calling.
And then if on top of it you don't know if there's Japanese creeping around out there somewhere.
You do, because when they come, it gets quiet.
Oh.
Yeah. Any people moving around, everything will get real quiet. That's when you look out.
After Hollandia, once that operation was concluded, where did you go after that?
Went to Biak.
Biak?
Yeah. And from Biak up to Lady. I didn't make the landing at Lady. I went in there afterwards. The Biak was another fiasco where it had tied down. That they weren't getting it done. It was commanded by Lieutenant Major General Hardin. He had the 41st Division. The 41st Division was a division that had relieved us down at Boona.
Boona, yeah.
So Hardin, this H test, this was Operation H in Biak. Anyway, they pulled out a lot of supplies from Hollandia and troops. Went on in Biak. Had to have those airfields. And it had bogged down, they weren't getting them. 3 airfields, 3 fine airfields. They would support bombers. And that was the key to the Philippines. So they sent Eichelberg in to consolidate. The old cleanup man. We went, he took 6 officers. And we left Hollandia. There's a big lake there called Centenny Lake. And they sent Navy cats in there. Picked us up. The general took one other officer and myself in one cat. General Byers, the chief of staff, and That was all. Took a couple of officers. That was all that was going up there to start with, because all of 41st Division headquarters was there, you see. And we were about 150 miles from there. Yeah, maybe further. So we went in a hard storm.
Yeah, listen, I wanted to go do
They had to leave the fighter escort.
you know.
See, we're at the Jap now, and they got airfields. And we flew about 50 feet. We could pick up because they don't want to get up where either radar or the fighters could pick you up. It's a lot harder to find you down on the ocean than it is up in the air. So we flew at a very, very low altitude all the way up there. And got there, and the storm was abating somewhat, but the waves were high. And this fighter pilot, we had 4 fighters. He said, "I gotta go. You got 15 minutes. I can give you 15 minutes."
Yeah, I wouldn't blame you.
So there wasn't anything to do but set those planes down. And we went into that chalk and hit it and bounced the plane way back up and turned sideways. I knew we were gone.
Say goodbye.
Yeah, that's right.
No way, but I can see a little old blonde lieutenant, naval officer wrestling that plane. He brought it back in, set it down again, and goes going back in. And they brought a boat out to take us off, and he couldn't get up to the ship because it was so rough.
Yeah.
And it went around under the nose. And
I know it.
the colors are rolling. Got to keep it in the wind. And we went out the escape hatch.
Yeah.
And that aluminum is wet and slippery. And
I know you know.
I'm the first out. I went over and I had sense enough to wait. That boat was dropping away from me. When I jumped, the boat was going away, and I did fine. So my general was coming, and I said, "General, when I holler, you jump." I'm giving the command. and he did a little back over, and I yelled at him now, and he jumped, and the boat was going, the ship was going down from him, and he was all right. He shaken up a little bit, but we got to the shore.
Yeah, if you're going down and the boat is coming up,
Break your leg, break your back. We lost a sergeant there. Went over with his pack and everything else. Missed
you
it.
know, the WMU.
That wave, I don't know how he ever landed, and I don't know how he ever took off. Incidentally, I ran into I don't know who, here in Knoxville. Said I was on the shore watching this deal take place out there.
really?
And watching you guys come on. I didn't have sense enough. They was in a gathering of some kind to find out who he was and so forth. But we got to the shore, and General Fuller met us. General said, "General, how are you?"
Yeah.
But I'd like to schedule for another.
Would you be if you were fixing to be relieved?
Yeah.
Classmates.
That's hard.
So they went into the tent to complete that. And it's embarrassing to be standing by a situation like that's my second time.
You were there with Harding when Harding was relieved.
Well, I wasn't.
You were
I wasn't
right,
present.
but
I was there.
Uh-huh.
I wasn't present, but this time I'm standing up against and another lake. But he came out. The general came out a few minutes and called his little staff together. His immediate staff. That I've been relieved. I'm going to Sydney. We should all come to the turn around.
Yeah, before anybody
It's
else.
hard. So
I hope so.
that's in the afternoon, and that night we were down in Sandbag tent, and the old man because
If I send
they ambushed
someone
one
to come down, I thought if you would come down
weapons
there,
carrier
you'd
the
send
next
fire
day
thing.
and killed everybody in the weapons carrier. Going
Oh, no, I don't care.
There's a huge cliffs there, and this operation going up against the cliffs and couldn't move. And they had enough anti-aircraft stuff in there for all the airfield, you know, and anything came over, they didn't shoot, they hosed the air.
I hope I didn't get on them.
We had a plane come in bringing maps, and made a circle, started at the beach, and opened his bomb base doors, come drop his maps in, and when he did that, they shut him down and let him get our own plane. But when those doors opened, you see, here's all that aircraft stuff there. He didn't last 20 seconds.
Yeah, we didn't get his napkins. Our napkins over here. Oh.
A lot of ways for things to go bad in a war.
Called the Jesus factor.
Thing you can't figure out.
Can't fix it. Thank you, Ms. Brown.
Appreciate it.
If you get around to it, you can bring us a potato and a steak, maybe.
It seems as though Eichelberger, both at Buna and then at Biak, could take a situation that had deteriorated pretty badly and turn it around. What was the key, do you think, to his being able to do that? Because just relieving somebody and putting somebody else in command isn't going to make a difference automatically.
Well, you've got to look at the personality of the man. Domineering. He's big. He's forceful. And secondly, he's been in the business a long time. Well, 36 years, as I remember, of experience. He's a lieutenant general, which was a high rank. And he, next to MacArthur, when we got there, he's the ranking officer in the Pacific, or in the Southwest Pacific. So he went into Buna and accomplished that, and he picked up a lot of experience there. So it was a natural thing then that he'd be the cleanup man at BIAC to get it going, because they've got deadlines on these airfields. The situation demands that the airfield be captured intact as much as possible. Of course, there were always bombs, some, and they had to be repaired. But the hard deal was already made, and so it was taking advantage of the Jap airfield. We always had to expand them. We demanded much more space, and as a matter of fact, a little island attached to a BIAC was called Wadkey. And the airfield ran from tide to tide. You came in and you could get the wheels wet setting it down, and you could get them wet leaving, you know. In this cliff area where we were tied down at BIAC, they had a little spotter plane there that would back up against the cliff. And at low tide, would head straight down. There's, of course, a sloping area. And at low tide, he'd take off from there and run down there, and then just as he got to the water's edge, he'd take off. And he'd land the same way. But at high tide, he couldn't do that because there wasn't enough space, even for a little old Cub scout plane.
That's short runway.
That was about 100 yards.
Is it true that I ran into someplace that Eichelberger probably would have gotten a Congressional Medal of Honor except MacArthur blocked it? Did you hear anything about that? I'm not trying to rake up old bad times, but I ran into something just today about he'd gotten the Distinguished Service Cross and 3 Silver Stars.
He was recommended for the Medal of Honor, and MacArthur stopped it. He would not endorse it with the War Department. He'd gotten 2 himself, and he didn't want anybody else, any other job to have it.
Seems to me like the height of ingratitude thing. If somebody goes in there and puts out his fires, and
Well, of course, we would have been delighted if the old man had gotten the Medal of Honor. I think that let's make this on a personal basis. I've got 4 decorations: Legion of Merit, Bronze Star with cluster, and then a unit citation. If I had been in the English Army or the Australian Army, I wouldn't have gotten the decoration, because I wouldn't have merited it. And so the Americans, they're promiscuous with decorations. There's no question of that. As compared to other armies, you know, the Australians kind of laugh about our decorations, I think, sometimes. But so the Medal of Honor normally, as far as I know, is always given in an act of greatest heroism, personal heroism, and you've saved bodies, units, situations, things like that. And most of them were given posthumously. So Eichelberger, while he's in the front line, it's particularly true at both places, Biak and Luna, there wasn't quite that kind of a situation, you know, where he's bodily saving these guys here. At Finchhaven, a place I mentioned a while ago, Jack made a landing, and the next day they found about, as I remember now, I wasn't there, I was just reading about this, I saw the report on about 50 Jap bodies around this gun pit, 50 caliber gun pit. And the gunner's still in there, and his legs are gone, and his arms are gone, and he's just absolutely shot all to hell. But in the meantime, he's stopped that onslaught from coming in to get to his troops. Of course, he got the Medal of Honor, but now that's when you ought to get the Medal of Honor. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I understand.
But I venture to say that, of course, MacArthur's came in the First World War, so I don't know under what conditions he got the Medal of Honor. I just don't know. I think he had 2, as I remember.
I believe his father got one.
Yes, he did. I'm sure of that.
Back on Missionary Ridge, I think. He was a color bearer and a very young man in the last stage of the Civil War.
Yeah, I'm sure he did.
You said you weren't involved at least in the landing immediately at Leyte. You got involved in it.
Actually, all the Leyte experience I had was to go in as an observer after the battle was over. We didn't have that landing at our corps.
I see.
But they sent me. I went up there with Chief of Staff, and we stayed a long time. And I was only at Tacloban, which is just one landing spot, but I didn't see any of the activity.
You say you didn't spend much time in the Philippines?
No, I didn't. That's the only experience I had in the Philippines. Then I came back, and we were getting ready to make the big land in the Philippines, and I was rotated. The situation, I had long been eligible for rotation. Rotation was based on length of service, combat experience, decorations, points, you know. And in my corps, of course, the attrition through the two and a half years has been great. Attrition of all kinds, sickness, rotation, things like that. So I told General Eichelberg, I said, I'm up for, I'm ready for rotation. He said, Ronnie, whenever I think about rotation, I think of an old man with a long gray beard, Uncle Sam. And he said, you ain't gonna be rotated. He said, I'll send you down to Sydney for some leave. I want you to go down and get some rest. That's when I told you I went down to Sydney for Louis leave. He stopped. Well, the morale was getting pretty bad on rotation. I mean, the old timers. At that point, Chuck, I was the oldest officer in point of service and points in Corps headquarters. So many had been rotated, a few of them killed, sick, lame, lazy, so forth. And some of the colonels had gotten rid of, and I had the points. So then Eichelberger went to the 8th Army, and the General Swift took us. So my rotation came up.
Oh.
And he said that I'd gotten along with General Swift. I was doing it for him. And he called me to his tent. He said, you're up for rotation. Yes, sir. Well, I need you for this job. So we planned in the Philippines. I felt like it was a young, he didn't like it down there. So that was in the morning, and noon I was to go to the airfield. I went off and got my little gear together. Old man had dismissed me for your company. I started out. And this was a nice gesture. He came, the general came, put his arm around me and walked me to the Jeep. And he said, I want to wish you good luck and thank you for the service. I thought that was coming from a busy, big-time professional general to just a civilian, really. And I thought that was a real nice gesture.
It was classy.
So I left with a real good taste. But I tell you, a real interesting thing. Chuck, is this boring the hell out of you?
I'm fascinated by it.
This was one of the lucky things that back down in Goodenough, long before this, when I told you we were staging for the Hollandia operation, there was a lieutenant in the transportation office, a base. See, they have a little base there, and he was the transportation officer. And they were driving him crazy. He had a few planes, and he had forever seat on a plane at a bucket seat, He's got 10 guys that's demanding that everybody's descending on him, and there's a lot of rank down there. And he's lieutenant, and the majors and the colonels and the generals. Everybody's kicking him around. And he came to me. I was going somewhere, and he said, Major, I'm going crazy. I'm ready to shoot myself. He was. He said, they're driving me up to the wall. I can't handle it. He's a, you know, a nice little boy to start with. So I went back, when I got back to headquarters, I said, Chief of Staff, why don't you assign all this transportation business to my section? And I got a captain down there that's tough as iron, and we relieved this kid down there. We didn't relieve him of the job, but we set the priorities, see. And my goodness, well, of course I forgot about him, and we got along right with it. To our Corps headquarters, which was the ranking headquarters down there, the bozos that's trying to put the pressure on for transportation didn't mean a thing, you know. We said who could go and who couldn't, according to the lot of seat. Well, what passes a year or something, and up at Hollandia, which has become a big base for this time. And I don't mean that. I mean the idea. The actors were. Hollandia is a great big base. And so when I get rotated, maybe home for Christmas, that'll be my third Christmas. And I still got down there and they went in transportation orders. Sergeant said, Colonel, you got a priority 3. Said, the wounded, you got a lot of VIPs here. It's a safe area now, and the congressmen are out here. And he said, out of the bunch with all 2s and 1s, said, I'd say it'll be a week before I get you out of here. And they're sympathetic because they're, you know, after all, they got he said, it'd be easier for me to fly. I can get you down to Sydney. Get a plane from there, maybe. And he said it'd be rough. But I got no hope. Well, you do the best you can, I knew you would. And I turned around and ran into this lieutenant. He's a captain now, you know. And he just ate it. I said, what are you doing here? He said, I'm a transportation officer. And he said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm trying to get home. And he said, what's your problem? I said, well, I've got a priority 3 on rotation. And he's going to do anything for me 3 or 4 days. He said, well, come on. He said, well, I'll put you up. I said, well, I'll find me some semi-permanent quarters. He said, no, I'll just stay with me. I said, well, wait a minute. And he went in the office. He knocked him in and came back. He said, come on now, I got a good place for you. I got a drink for you. And I'll find you later. Well, I'd rather just go on and get kind of settled. He said, oh, said, you're leaving at 0400 in the morning. Colonel, this is a converted bomber, and it's got 1 reclining seat, and you'll be the ranking officer, and you can sleep all over San Francisco.
Sometimes it comes home and
That's bed on the waters. Exactly. So, sure enough, we wined and dined and had a good visit that night, and then the next morning I lit out for home. We got to a little island, Johnson, right in the middle of the Pacific.
middle of nothing at all.
Nothing. And it was a hard storm. We had no ceiling. And we got out there and the sun started circling. I said, oh, hell, here we go again. I'd been lost at sea before. Here we go. And we'll probably end up in the drink. That son of a gun got the wheels down and came in on the end of that run. It's like it had been the brightest day in the world. These were civilian navigators by the way they were TWA people. And, he was off that big old plane out in there, and I was up on the deck with him, you know. And our next stop was Hawaii. Then we came in San Francisco. That's the longest over water flight, you know, there is, without any land that we had. Got there and it was fogged out. And we were flying with another plane, Red Cross plane, had a whole bunch of wounded on it. Everybody was desperate. It would roll on gas and completely fog. You could see the spires of the Golden Gate sticking up like that, but you couldn't see the bridge. You see the fog was so low, and it followed the coastline. The bay was clear, but you can't put a land-based plane down in the bay. Not very well. And he said, I haven't got enough gas to go. So circled it through a little while, and they got a fighter-based plane base over there, protection kind of area. And the fog lifted a little bit, and he put this plane in there. He had a hard time landing it because it's short speed. We got in there early morning, and here I am at home. And the thing I did, we're out in an airfield, at the end of an airfield, in an airplane, and no communication, nothing to see on his radio with the base. And about mid-afternoon, before we were dead, we were just 30 miles from our base. So he lifted that thing up, we got into the base, and I could get to it. So I said, I've had enough. I've been lost at sea, I've been through this thing, and all that. I'm going to take a train. And I was called over to Chicago. Got on a old limited, started to Chicago, got over the mountain, and the train stopped, had a wreck.
Wasn't intended for you to get home.
Piled up about this high on each side, you know. Yeah, we were so long that we lost the identity of our train. We just, then on, they sidetracked the end and like that. And we were more than a day late going into Chicago. Not hours, but somewhere around 36 hours. Ruth had worn out the corridors of the hotel waiting on me.
So did you see her by Christmas, or did you make it?
Made it. Yeah. Made it because of that captain down there. There's no way I would have been the last part of January.
After read upon the waters?
Red on the water.
Now, did you stay in the States then for how much longer? This was Christmas of '44. That you were
Christmas. War didn't break out in 44, did it?
War broke out in '41.
41.
And
Yeah, it'd be
Christmas of '44.
Yeah.
And then you stayed back here in this country for a while?
Yeah, I was assigned then to the Second Army down to Memphis until we were mustered out.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So you didn't go back to the Pacific? You
No,
didn't have to.
no. I was in line to maybe go up to Canada.
interview with Mr. Fred V.